The U.S. Mexico border is more than just a line on a map. For millions, it symbolizes hope and the end of a dangerous journey. Thousands arrive daily from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Families, teenagers, and individuals share a common dream: a life free from fear. This movement has created a humanitarian, political, and security crisis. The reasons for leaving home are rooted in violence, poverty, and desperation. To understand this crisis, we must look beyond the border. Powerful criminal organizations, drug cartels, and violent gangs control regions, forcing people to flee. Migration is often the only way to stay alive. This is a deep dive into the dark world shaping the U.S. border crisis. Cartels are synonymous with drug trafficking, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Their power stems from the U.S. demand for illegal drugs. But their influence extends beyond drugs. They control local economies and extort businesses. In the Northern Triangle, gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 operate with similar brutality. Families can't pay the war tax, farmers abandon land, and mothers fear for their sons' lives. Migration begins with escaping this daily violence. Cartels and gangs also control the journey north, turning human smuggling into a profitable business. Migrants pay thousands to smugglers working for cartels. The border crisis is a direct consequence of cartel actions. Understanding this crisis means recognizing the cartel's role in it. In Mexico, life is defined by strategic cartel violence. Cartels like Sinaloa and CJN fight for control over smuggling routes and local populations. Civilians are often primary targets, caught in the crossfire. Towns become battlegrounds with gunfights, car bombs, and military-grade weapons. Families live in constant fear, making daily life a gamble. This violence displaces people, creating internal refugees who look north. Entire villages are abandoned, with families fleeing for their lives. The choice is stark: leave or die. Stories from these regions are harrowing, with families fleeing after brutal cartel attacks. This isn't migration by choice, it's forced displacement driven by cartel terror. In the Northern Triangle, street gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 dominate daily life. These gangs control neighborhoods with impunity, acting as law and executioner. They have transnational connections and work with Mexican cartels. Their power is rooted in extreme brutality, extorting residents and controlling resources. Invisible walls trap residents in fear, making normal life impossible. Gangs prey on youth, offering a false sense of belonging. Forced recruitment is rampant, with boys pressured to join or face death. Parents live in constant fear for their children's safety. Many unaccompanied minors at the U.S. border are sent to be saved from gang violence. The U.S. is seen as a sanctuary from a world where children are hunted. In cartel and gang-controlled areas, survival comes at a price. Extortion, or war tax, is imposed on everyone, from small business owners to ordinary families. Gang members collect fees door to door, knowing who lives where. Failure to pay results in violent consequences, from beatings to murder. This extortion destroys local economies and forces businesses to close. As legitimate businesses disappear, unemployment rises and more youth join gangs. Migration becomes the only viable option for many. Stories of extortion are common, with families fleeing after being bled dry by criminals. These people aren't seeking wealth in America, they're escaping a life of extortion. They were trying to make an honest living but had nothing left to give. Families in Mexico and the Northern Triangle fear for their children. Cartels and gangs see young people as future foot soldiers. Forced recruitment is a powerful driver of migration. Criminal groups target children, luring them with promises or threats. The recruitment process starts small but quickly escalates. Leaving the gang is almost impossible and often punished by death. Parents feel powerless to protect their children. Refusing to join is dangerous, often resulting in violence or threats to the family. Many parents send their children north to save them from gang life. The journey is dangerous, but staying home is more dangerous. The journey north is controlled by cartels. Migrants must pay thousands to smugglers known as coyotes just to cross cartel territory. Once independent, Coyotes now work for organized crime, turning human smuggling into a multi-billion-dollar business. Migrants sell everything or borrow money, but safety is never guaranteed. In the end, they pay their oppressors for a chance at freedom. The journey north is fraught with danger, but one of the most terrifying risks is being kidnapped. For cartels, migrants are not just clients, they are potential hostages. Kidnapping for ransom is now a standard part of the smuggling business. Migrants are abducted, held in brutal conditions, and forced to call family for ransom. Families must raise thousands of dollars, often with no guarantee of release. For many, the journey becomes a terrifying ordeal of extortion and fear. For many migrants, the inability to pay smugglers leads to a darker fate: forced labor and human trafficking. Cartels exploit their debt, forcing them to work in brutal conditions, fields, drug labs, or as lookouts. Women and children are especially vulnerable, sometimes trafficked or sold into sexual slavery. This is the hidden underbelly of the migration crisis, a criminal industry trafficking in human lives. For many, the journey north ends not in freedom, but in exploitation and despair. The journey north is a brutal test of endurance. Smugglers lead migrants through deserts, jungles, and mountains, often at night with little food or water. Many are left behind, and the Sonoran Desert is littered with reminders of those who didn't survive. Along the way, migrants face violence from gangs and corrupt officials. By the time they reach the border, they are exhausted and traumatized. The journey itself is a humanitarian crisis, where human life is the cheapest currency. The immense power of the cartels, their violence, and their ability to destabilize entire nations all stems from one primary source: money. The vast majority of that money flows from the north, from the insatiable demand for illegal drugs in the United States. The American market for cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl fuels this multi-billion-dollar industry. Every dollar spent on illicit drugs here empowers these criminal organizations, funding violence and corruption across borders. The chaos we see abroad is a direct result of a market that originates within U.S. borders. To get their product to the American market, cartels must control territory. The most valuable territories are the smuggling routes, known as corridors, and the border crossings themselves, which are called plazas. These plazas, which include official ports of entry like Tijuana or Juarez, as well as vast remote stretches of desert, are the gateways to the billion-dollar U.S. market. Control over a plaza means the power to tax every illicit good that passes through it, whether it's drugs, weapons, or people. This is why the most intense and bloody battles between cartels are fought over these strategic strips of land along the U.S. Mexico border. The fight for these corridors is relentless. Cartels like Sinaloa and CJN invest immense resources, both in manpower and firepower, to seize and hold these routes. The violence in Mexican border cities is a direct reflection of these turf wars. When a city like Tijuana experiences a surge in homicides, it's often because one cartel is trying to violently wrest control of that plaza from another. This constant warfare turns these cities into dangerous places for ordinary citizens, who become victims of the crossfire, kidnappings, and extortion that accompany the conflict. This localized violence is a major push factor for migration from Mexico's own northern states. Cartels have become masters of border logistics. They use a variety of sophisticated methods to move drugs across. They build elaborate tunnels, some equipped with lighting and rail systems. They use drones to fly small packages over the border fence. They hide narcotics in secret compartments within commercial trucks carrying legitimate goods. But honestly, one of their most effective tactics involves using human beings as a tool. Cartels have learned to weaponize migration flows to their advantage. They strategically push large groups of migrants to a specific section of the border to create a humanitarian spectacle. This tactic serves a dual purpose. A large group of asylum-seeking families, including many women and children, requires significant attention from U.S. Border Patrol agents. The agents are drawn away from their regular patrol duties to process, transport, and care for the migrants. This creates a deliberate and calculated diversion. While agents are overwhelmed in one area, cartel smugglers exploit the resulting security gap a few miles away to move high-value drug shipments across the border undetected. The migrants, fleeing violence, are unknowingly used as pawns in the very drug trade that fuels that violence. Fentanyl has revolutionized the drug trade. 50 times more potent than heroin, it's cheap to make in small labs using chemicals from China. For cartels, the profits are astronomical, fueling violence, corruption, and environmental devastation across Mexico. The U.S. demand drives this deadly new economy, leaving destruction on both sides of the border. The drug trade does not just create violence, it systematically dismantles legitimate economies, leaving desperation in its wake. When cartels move into a region, they don't coexist with the local economy, they consume it. They might start by extorting farmers, but soon they may seize the land itself to grow illicit crops like opium poppies or marijuana. A farmer who once grew avocados or corn is forced to cultivate drugs for the cartel. Refusal means death. This effectively destroys legal agriculture, which is the backbone of many rural communities. The entire economic structure is reoriented to serve the criminal enterprise. This infiltration extends beyond agriculture. In towns and villages, cartels might take over mining operations, logging industries, and even fisheries. They use violence and intimidation to push out legal operators and install their own. This process, known as criminal governance, means that the most profitable economic activities are now controlled by violent organizations. This leaves ordinary people with fewer and fewer legal ways to make a living. The jobs disappear. The small businesses close due to extortion. The local economy shrivels until the only viable employer left is the cartel itself. This economic devastation creates a powerful push factor for migration. When a young man sees that the only path to survival in his town is to become a hitman or a drug field worker for the cartel, the dangerous journey north suddenly seems like a rational choice. He is not just seeking a better salary, he is seeking a life outside the criminal world that has taken over his home. For a family whose farm has been seized, or whose small shop has been extorted into bankruptcy, there is nothing left. Migration is not a choice to improve their life, but the only choice to have a life at all. The drug trade, funded by U.S. demand, therefore creates a self-perpetuating cycle of migration. The profits from drug sales fuel the violence and economic destruction that force people to flee. Their desperation then makes them vulnerable to exploitation by the cartel's human smuggling networks. In this sense, the drug trade is not just a parallel issue to the border crisis, it is the root cause. It poisons communities, erodes economic stability, and leaves millions of people with a single harrowing option: to abandon everything and run for their lives toward the U.S. border. Cartels and gangs thrive where government fails. In parts of Mexico and Central America, the state cannot protect its people. Criminal groups fill the void, patrolling streets, settling disputes, and providing services. Citizens lose faith, left to fend for themselves. For many, migration becomes the only hope for safety and a functioning government. Weak governance breeds corruption, and cartels exploit it with a simple choice: plata o plomo, silver or lead. Officials at every level are offered bribes or face threats, poisoning entire institutions. The line between authority and crime blurs, leaving citizens with nowhere to turn. For many, fleeing is the only escape from a system rigged against them. When corruption hollows out government institutions, the justice system collapses. For ordinary citizens, there's no path to protection or justice. Reporting a crime is dangerous, and even honest officers can't help. Courts are overwhelmed and corrupt. Most cases go nowhere. In places like Mexico and Honduras, over 90% of murders go unsolved. For victims and families, there's no closure, only despair. This is why so many seek asylum at the U.S. border. Their home offers no justice, only fear. Seeking asylum is a profound act, a vote of no confidence in your own government's ability to protect you. When thousands flee, it signals a catastrophic breakdown of the state. These migrants aren't just seeking opportunity, they're escaping real threats their governments cannot stop. Until these nations build trustworthy institutions, desperate families will continue to vote with their feet. The direct result of the cartel's control over migration routes is the overwhelming strain it places on the entire U.S. border management system. When criminal organizations decide to move people, they don't send them in a slow, steady trickle. They move them in large, organized groups. They consolidate hundreds, sometimes thousands of migrants in staging areas in northern Mexico, and then push them across the border in a concentrated wave. This is a deliberate strategy. The sudden arrival of a massive group of people, many of whom are families with young children or unaccompanied minors in need of immediate care, creates an instant logistical crisis for U.S. Border Patrol. The infrastructure at the border was never designed to handle this kind of volume or demographic. Processing facilities quickly become dangerously overcrowded. Shelters and holding centers are pushed far beyond their capacity. There is a shortage of everything: beds, food, water, medical supplies, and personnel. Border Patrol agents, whose primary job is law enforcement and security, are forced to become caregivers. They spend their time changing diapers, preparing baby formula, and trying to manage a humanitarian situation they are not equipped or trained for. This diverts them entirely from their security mission of patrolling the vast stretches of the border. This overwhelming of the system is not an unfortunate side effect of the cartel's business. It is a key part of their business model. A chaotic and overwhelmed border is a porous border. The more resources the U.S. has to dedicate to processing and caring for large groups of asylum seekers in one area, the fewer resources are available for interdiction efforts elsewhere. The cartels understand this dynamic perfectly. They know which sectors are stretched thin and which access points are momentarily less guarded. The chaos they create is a smokescreen, a manufactured crisis that provides cover for their other illicit activities. The strain extends far beyond the immediate borderline. It ripples outward, affecting local communities, non-profit organizations, and federal agencies. Small border towns find their social services and hospitals stretched to the breaking point. Humanitarian groups like Catholic Charities and the Red Cross scramble to provide food, shelter, and support, often with limited resources. The entire system, from the initial encounter at the border to the long-term immigration court process, becomes backlogged and gridlocked. This state of constant crisis, engineered and exploited by the cartels, defines the modern reality at the U.S. Mexico border. At the U.S. Mexico border, cartels create mixed flows of migrants, families fleeing violence, economic migrants, and even criminals, all arriving together. This blurs the line between those seeking refuge and those posing risks, making it incredibly hard for border officials to tell who is who. The result? A humanitarian and security dilemma at the very heart of the crisis. Cartels move both people and drugs, using large groups of migrants as diversions for law enforcement. When agents respond to a mass crossing, cartels exploit the distraction to smuggle drugs elsewhere. Migrants become pawns, their safety disregarded by smugglers focused on profit. The migrant crisis enables the drug crisis, turning the border into a shell game the cartels control. The impact of cartel operations on the U.S. border goes far beyond drug smuggling. Cartels exploit border vulnerabilities, smuggling not just drugs but weapons, criminals, and even potential terrorists. Their influence extends deep into American cities, fueling violence and crime. The chaos at the border is a symptom of a much deeper problem, one that threatens both national security and public safety on both sides. The U.S. border crisis is driven by more than poverty and dreams for a better life. At its core is the dark hand of organized crime. Cartels and gangs are the architects of chaos, turning desperation into displacement and profit. They control escape routes, exploit migrants, and fuel a cycle of misery. The unchecked power of these organizations is the true source of the storm. Understanding the central role of cartels forces us to rethink our approach to the border. A solution focused only on enforcement at the border, on walls, technology, and more agents, is like trying to mop up a flood while ignoring the broken pipe. It addresses the symptom, not the cause. As long as the cartels remain powerful enough to terrorize nations and control smuggling corridors, people will continue to flee, and the cartels will find a way to move them. A genuine long-term solution must be a holistic one. It must address the crisis on both sides of the border, because it is a shared crisis. This means confronting the engine that powers these criminal groups, the demand for illicit drugs in the United States. The river of cash flowing south from American consumers is what allows cartels to buy weapons, bribe officials, and sustain their reign of terror. Reducing this demand through public health initiatives, addiction treatment, and education is not just a domestic policy issue, it is a foreign policy imperative. It is one of the most powerful tools we have to weaken the financial might of the cartels, and in doing so, reduce the violence that drives migration from the south. It also requires a deep and sustained partnership with the governments of Mexico and Central America. The goal must be to strengthen their institutions so they can protect their own citizens. This involves more than just military aid. It means investing in judicial reform to fight corruption and end impunity. It means supporting community-based violence prevention programs. It means creating economic opportunities so that young people have a viable alternative to joining a gang. Helping these nations build a state that is stronger than the cartels is the only way to restore hope and stability, giving people a reason to stay home. The crisis at the border is complex and there are no easy answers. But one thing is clear, the men, women, and children arriving at the border are not the enemy. They are the survivors of a war fueled by our own consumption of drugs and enabled by the failure of governments to protect them. Their journey is a testament to the terrifying power of the cartels. Confronting that power, both at home and abroad, is not just about managing a border crisis. It is about confronting the criminal forces that have created so much suffering and restoring security and justice for all.